Hey guys and girls, this is going to be my review of Euphoria, Trouble Don't Last Always. So this is take two for this review, because the other one didn't record properly or something. So hopefully I can live up to at least some of the first review. But this is kind of a Christmas special, although that's the wrong sort of phrase with a show like Euphoria. But it's very much the Euphoria take on a Christmas special. It's a one-off episode, although it may sort of be followed up in the new series. So they're going to start a new series properly, I should say, in the new year. And this is kind of like an introduction, almost like an in-between episode between the end of season one and the start of the new series, but a special kind of one-off, which I guess stands quite nicely on its own. And it aired this week, so these are my thoughts. And boy, it was a knockout episode. I really loved this. It was kind of felt like a refreshing change for Euphoria, and very different to the first season. And probably, as I said, works very much as a standoff, but it was such a refreshing, episode. And I think what I'll say is anyone who's had issues with addiction or had to deal with, obviously go through it, people they know have had addiction, then I highly recommend this one. It's a really powerful, hard-hitting, but actually touching at times, hour of TV. And there is hope in there as well. There's a charm to it, and there's a hope to it as well. Then people obviously can get through and beat addiction. But yeah, it certainly pulls no punches, and it's very hard hitting at times. But it's just a beautiful hour of TV, I thought. One of the best things I've seen all year. The setup is basically that Rue, following the breakup with her and Jules, she is basically relapsed again, and she's trying to get through Christmas, and she meets up with Ali, who we find out in this episode his real name is actually Martin, and they meet in a diner on Christmas Eve, and they just discuss things, and they discuss her addiction and everything that goes along with it. And there's something obviously very poetic about the way they're meeting on Christmas Eve, kind of two sort of recovering drug addicts, because Ali, or Martin as I guess he's known now, is sort of her sort of sponsor at this point. He's supporting Rule, and it's just the majority of the episode is them in this diner sitting across from each other, just talking honestly about the whole thing, and him giving her these words of advice. And it's really powerful stuff. It's beautifully filmed. The acting is really on point, and it's great stuff. I find it very moving at times, but it is purposely a break from the norm of how Euphoria, a typical episode of Euphoria, sort of would play out. And I think what I like about it is that we do get one scene before we go to them in the diner, and that scene is Rule with Jules, and they're kind of in a happier place. That it's them waking up together in the morning, and I got the impression it was either meant to be a flashback scene, or maybe it was like in Rule's head, it was her, kind of remembering things, that sort of thing. But anyway, because Jules goes off and Rule basically goes into the bathroom and starts taking some pills, but I got him. It had that sort of surreal, dreamlike sort of Euphoria type feel. But anyway, I like that they had that scene as a way to say, well, that is then, this is now, because then it cuts to the diner, and we're there for pretty much the whole episode. Well, we are there for the whole episode, really, after that. But I like the way it sort of flows and plays out almost like a stage sort of drama. There's this one sort of setting, them bouncing off each other back and forth, but this very natural, very condensed sort of humanistic type conversation. And I sort of like as well, then at one point you do have kind of like an intermission where Martin goes out for a cigarette, but he also goes out to phone his family because it's obviously Christmas Eve. And we find out a lot about Martin in this episode. We find out that he basically, when he was addicted to drugs and things got really heavy, then that led to the breakdown of his family. Him getting divorced from his wife or her kicking him out, and he did some really bad and dark things, and he's totally honest and open about them in this episode. But yeah, at one point he steps outside and he calls his family and he wants to say Merry Christmas to his children because he won't get to see them on Christmas Day itself. And I like then there's that little break where he goes outside and at the same time Rule is like on her, well, not on her phone, but she's listening to some music. She's in her own sort of headspace, and it's sort of contrasts to him trying to say like Merry Christmas on the phone to his family and Rule back in the diner in her own sort of headspace. But it almost like an intermission, as I said, but yeah, for the majority of it, it's them sitting down and talking honestly, and it's really powerful stuff. And he says some interesting things. He's honest about why he's sitting there in a diner on Christmas Eve and instead of with his family. And I think that they do bring that back throughout the episode. That there's almost he brings it back at some point, then there's almost some sort of beauty, some sort of poetry to it. The fact that two people in their position can be sitting together and talking about the world, talking about issues and life and everything. And that is almost the poetry of life. And at one point he uses the metaphor, then you can only really rely on your inner self, your soul, your poetry. And when he first says it, you're not quite sure what he means, but then he brings it back to it so well and sort of pays that off. And he's kind of right. There is a beauty, no matter how tough life can be and stuff, there is sort of a beauty to, people getting together, having honest, conversations and just talking about everything. And he does this really interesting metaphor where he sort of compares, addiction and getting sucked in like that to kind of, like modern sort of capitalism, and he talks about like false revolutions or fake revolutions. And he says, well, there's like with Nike, they targeted like the black market, the black urban market. And it's like this thing of, well, cynical marketing that they targeted it at black people and claimed that they were doing it to, connect and create a revolution. But realistically, it's just all for money. It's because they're a target audience. And he says, yeah, then I look over at the price of this tracksuit and it's like 100 and whatever it was bucks. So it's like, yeah, sort of false revolutions and stuff. And that's part of his whole point about it's all about you can only believe in yourself in a way, your inner self. That's what you need to get through. That's how you create a revolution. And I will say, actually, I think they do touch on the whole current situation in America, like Black Lives Matters and the whole racial tension over there at the moment. And again, credit to them because they handle it in a really sensitive, subtle way. I don't think they bang you over the head with it. But, the point is raised that obviously you've got two African American characters having this discussion and it's in the setting. And actually he raises the point later on when he's talking about, making his point about the poetry and them being there, then actually we have made progress because once upon a time too, people like us wouldn't have the freedom to be in this diner. and having this conversation like we are. And even though it's clearly not enough, and sometimes it does feel like 2 steps backwards with progress on this sort of thing, a comment like that does put things in perspective, because sadly there wasn't a time when that was possible. So that is something. So they touch on the racial situation, but they don't overdo it. I think it works very much for what they're saying in those scenes, but they definitely don't overdo it. But as I said, there is some dark things. Martin's very much honest about his family life, because towards the end, where it goes like really dark at one point, because Rule sort of opens up about when she threatened her mother, and when she had a bit of glass, like a broken bottle, to her throat and threatened to kill her. And Rule is basically saying, well, I'm not really proud of what I've done, and that kind of I've given up almost. She doesn't in so many words say that she's going to end her life, just then she's given into the drug sort of thing. And I've given up. I've decided I can't beat this thing. And Martin kind of calls her out on her bullshit on that, kind of saying, well, that's just an easy excuse and it lets you off the hook, that sort of thing. But he kind of asks, well, do you think I'm a good man, at one point? And it's a beautiful moment. And I think a lot of the direction in these later scenes are really good, because they really like cut close to their face. So you see him like looking right at her, being very honest and truthful, and you see her reaction. And when she says, yes, I do, it's this very childlike look on her face, but very sort of raw. She's got sort of blurry type eyes, but it's a very honest type response as well. You know, you think she really believes it, but then he tells this really dark story about how, come here. Tells this really honest story about how when he was younger, his father used to abuse his mother, and he thinks that might have rubbed off on him, because when he was going through his addiction, he abused his wife, and that's what led to the marriage. And Rule still has faith in him, still says, I think you're a good person. And there's a beautiful line from her, this beautiful but tragic line, when he asks her, well, how would you like to be remembered by your sister and your mother? And she doesn't know what she means, and then he quite frankly says, well, you've admitted then this is it in a way, then you've given up, then, you know, the drugs are going to beat you, the addiction is going to beat you. So how would you like them to remember you? And this obviously shocks her, because this hadn't really dawned on her before. But she comes out with this line about, well, I would like them to remember me as someone who tried to be a better person, a person I couldn't be, or something to that extent. And it's just beautiful. But he installs hope in her, he installs faith in her. And he puts certain things in perspective, but he's also honest with her a lot. He kind of describes like drug addiction at one point as like cancer, you know, that sort of thing. And it changes you, you know. When she says the story about her mother and the broken bottle, he kind of says, but you were a different person. The addiction changes you. The drugs sort of change you. So it's this great balance of being very honest with her, and if she's being a bit weak or you know being negative, he's honest about her and her flaws, but at the same time he is giving her good advice and he is supporting her, and definitely some of the dark stuff he's done or been through, it definitely should put things in perspective. A very sort of moving, raw and honest. I'm trying to think. Well, there's a sort of a cut-off scene at one point where, because Jules mentions about, sorry, I always do this, Jules and Rule, very similar, but Rule mentions about should she try and get back together with Jules, because at one point she sort of blames her for her addiction, because she kind of says, well, she cheated on me and obviously the whole thing made it harder. But she asks Martin, should I try and get back together with her again? And that's when Martin asks this waitress who works there, who he obviously knows, he's known for years, and she herself is a former addict, and that's why he's asking her. And the fact that you have this waitress who Martin knows, and they've both been through, the drugs and addiction and stuff, again, it adds to this sense of community, the fact that he regularly comes to this diner and has this connection. And there's a bit of banter there as well, which is very, realistic, and that's kind of the way things are sometimes. But I think this episode captures the way that sometimes you are actually closest to those who have been through similar experiences. Even if you don't know them that well, there is sort of a bond there. But anyway, as I say, Martin asks her this question, and she said basically that when she was a recovering, addict, then she did try, to recover, but at the same time she was obviously tempted by the drugs, but she also was tempted to have a relationship, and she said it doesn't really work because you need so much energy put into both. So it's basically, her advice is it's better to get on top of the addiction and beat that before you worry about a relationship, a committed relationship. So I really like that stuff. As I said, I like the fact that there's this extra character who Martin has known for years, and this sort of sense of community really brought home. But yeah, there is some strong stuff because religion is brought up at one point, and kind of Martin is kind of religious. Now, I'm not sure if he's like recently turned to religion because of the addiction, or if it's something he's been on and off with for years, but he kind of almost is very embarrassed at one point because he says to Rule, you may not believe in God, but he believes in you. And then Rule brings up her father dying, dying untimely and leaving a family behind, and says, well, so you're telling me because my father didn't believe in God, then, that's why he was died. And again, it's getting into this whole area of, well, if God is really created the world and had a plan for us all, then why stuff like that? Why would he let such a thing happen, that kind of thing? And obviously Martin feels terrible because I maybe should have thought that out, and he does bring it around and kind of says, well, who knows what the purpose is? I'm not claiming to have all the answers. I mean, who knows why, to be honest here, why there are girls your age who are no longer around who did nothing wrong, or they didn't get messed up in drugs, they just focused on schoolwork and stuff. They're not here now, and you are. I mean, sometimes the universe is just sort of random, and he sort of points that out, but it's very sensitive to Rule, but he definitely feels bad in that moment, I think you can tell. But it's a beautiful episode, really powerful stuff, and great acting between the two. The acting is really on point. And I kind of like the ending as well, when they sort of drive off into the snow. Well, I think it's raining. Was it snow? I can't remember. It was either rain. I think it might have been raining, actually. And you just have this extended shot of Rule in the passenger seat and glazing through the window, just very much deep in thought. It's almost very sort of melancholic, but there is a sense of hope by the end of this episode for her. I think he definitely installs some hope in her, and we'll see how that plays out in the new season, which is going to be the new year. But It was a great idea and it was brilliantly executed. And yeah, again, that sort of poetry of two addicts getting together on Christmas Eve. So that's what I meant by it's almost like an alternative, like the Euphoria Christmas episode. It's like this sort of take on a Christmas episode, which is unlike most you'll see. But really great stuff. It is one of my TV highlights of the year, and it has me excited for the new season, which will be coming in January, I think, later in January. But I did all of season one, so you can catch up with those reviews on the channel now. And let me know what you thought of this episode in the comments below. Like and subscribe. It is the Christmas season, so I'm doing lots of extra live streams, Christmas themed live streams, and some like Christmas movie reviews and stuff. But yeah, support the channel if you want to keep this content coming. But thanks for listening, and I'll see you guys later. Goodbye.